So we're here with Jason Kander, a veteran and former Secretary of State of Missouri. Thank you for joining us.
Thanks for having me.
So in your book, you talk about the need for veterans to both recognize and get help for their trauma and how it took you years to recognize your PTSD. That can obviously be a tough journey, but what do you think is the most important step for other veterans who are struggling with their mental health to take? And what do you think our leaders should be doing to address this crisis?
So first for me, well, I guess I would start with this, is that I think one of the biggest misconceptions out there is that the reason that veterans don't go get help is that it's always about this feeling of like thinking that they're weak if they go get help. And like, I'm not saying that's not a factor at times, but I think it's overblown how much of a factor that is compared to a couple of other things, which is one, oftentimes, whether you're talking veteran or anybody else, people just aren't aware that you can get better, right? Like when you think about the depictions that we have of people with PTSD, like in movies and on TV, it's almost always people who are careening toward the bottom. They're beating their spouse and they're committing crimes, and that's actually pretty uncommon. What's much more common are people who have been treated for PTSD and achieved a version of post-traumatic growth and have kind of moved on with their lives and are doing very well. It's actually happening around us all the time, but it's never depicted. And so we all tend to think that PTSD is a terminal diagnosis, that it will end in you either ending your life or at a minimum ending your career because you won't have any job prospects. And so that's a diagnosis people tend to want to stay away from. But the truth is that it's actually very treatable. And so that's the first thing that I think people need to know. The second is that, at least for veterans, I think a lot of it has to do with the fact that we do, and this kind of goes into the what can leaders do about it. There's a very necessary form of brainwashing that happens when you go into the military. And I say necessary very purposefully, which is that the message that's sent to those of us in the service is what you're doing is no big deal, that somebody else has it worse. And there's a reason for that. It's because for people to keep doing difficult, frightening jobs, you've got to believe it's no big deal. For me to, as an Army intelligence officer in Afghanistan, keep going into meetings with people who might want to kidnap and kill me, I've got to believe like this isn't a big deal compared to what other people are doing. So I don't fault the military for that at all. My problem is that when we leave the military, we are not equipped with an explanation that helps us flip that switch off. Nobody sits you down and says, okay, actually, that was a pretty big deal. You were likely to have some issues with this. And even as we enter the military, we don't get sufficient training about what PTSD is, what it looks like, what it could feel like, which would allow us to spot it in ourselves and spot it in our fellow service members.
Mm-hmm. And one thing that you've mentioned is post-traumatic growth, which I think is an interesting term. And could you sort of explain what you mean by that and sort of how you think that could apply to people dealing with PTSD?
Yeah, well, look, post-traumatic growth is just simply having treated successfully PTSD. It doesn't, what I'm not saying is curing PTSD. That's not a thing. I mean, PTSD is an injury, but it's an injury based on things that happened to you, meaning it's based on memories. So you can't cure it because you're not going to erase the memories. But it's like any other injury. You treat it, you learn how to manage it, and then you go forward with your life. Before I went into the Army, I had to get surgery and physical therapy on my right knee. And because I was playing pickup football with some buddies and I was stupidly like, hey, we should absolutely play tackle. And one of my really good friends was like an all-state free safety in Texas, and I wasn't. And so I tore up my knee really good. So I had to fix it to go into the Army. Well, I did. And, now I'm 41 years old. I still play competitive baseball, not softball, but baseball. In order to do that, I got to ice my knee. I got to pop a couple Advil, but like I'm age adjusted, still pretty fast. I got to play center field. I can bunt for a hit. My point is like my knee still works. It bothers me. It can flare up on me. I just got to know how to manage it. I got to know what to do with it. PTSD is no different in my life. I still have PTSD, but I understand things like, if it still happens occasionally, get nightmares. I understand, I wasn't doing what I was supposed to do during the day. I wasn't processing certain memories and certain feelings. I was avoiding them. And so my subconscious is going to deal with them while I'm asleep. If I don't want that to happen, I got to deal with those emotions and those memories during the day, which I do. And there's lots of stuff like that, meaning there's no job I can't do. There's no reason to have PTSD consistently disrupt my life. It doesn't have to, so long as I take care of it. Just like I got to ice my knee if I want to be able to, make some good plays in center field. It's no different.
Mm-hmm. And obviously veterans are, suffer a lot from PTSD, but there's a larger mental health crisis in our country right now, especially for young people, teenagers, a lot of whom are dealing with school shootings or active shooter threats. Do you think that there's strategies that you've learned or that you've spoken with other veterans about that maybe the wider society should incorporate, or even, sadly, kids might need to incorporate?
Yeah, I think it's simply making trauma therapy much more available to people, making sure that, insurance covers it and that it's treated no different than physical health. And because, look, you don't have to be a combat veteran to have trauma. And you don't have to have survived a school shooting. You could, people go through bad divorces. They have problems in their childhood. They lose loved ones. They get in car accidents. They watch the news in 2022. There's a lot of different things that you can have a trauma response to, and trauma is trauma. And so one thing I try and get across to everybody is that trying to rank your trauma against other people's trauma doesn't do you any good. I did it for over 10 years. And it didn't rank my trauma out of existence. It simply delayed my opportunity to deal with it and to heal. So we have to treat mental health the same as physical health. And your health plan should cover therapy. And look, we'd be a better society if more people dealt with their stuff. And a lot of people have stuff. Most people have stuff to deal with.
Mm-hmm. And I think some of our leaders have noticed this, and there's been some bipartisan support for addressing mental health. There's a new mental health hotline that was just introduced, 988. Do you think that you're seeing steps in the right direction to sort of have mental health be treated like it is, like an illness, like any other illness?
Yeah, look, I think we're definitely going in the right direction. I think we should go there faster.
Mm-hmm. Are there, you've mentioned insurance paying for therapy. Are there other things that you think could be enacted that are along those lines that would help move this along?
Well, I'll give you something that all of us can do, which is all of us can be more open about what we deal with in our mental health. I wish everybody who decided to go deal with their mental health issues got the same positive affirmation that I got, which is to say, I wish everybody who did this had the chance to have people, contact you every day and tell you that, you doing that saved their life. I'm so grateful and so blessed by that. But I try to get across to people that you don't have to be a well-known person to make that difference in people's lives. In the age of social media, we all live public lives to one degree or another. If all you do is you put on your Facebook profile, hey, I've been going through a difficult time since X, I'm going to go to therapy for it. Well, whether you ever hear from somebody or not, you probably will. But even if you don't, there's a very good chance you're going to give somebody else in your social orbit the permission slip that they need to go deal with their own stuff. And even if you're, mentally healthy and you don't use social media, if you just are public about it at work, if you tell a few of your close friends, that stuff spreads in a really positive way.
Sort of on a similar but a little bit unrelated topic, you had a viral ad in 2016 that called for stronger background checks for gun purchases. There's a recent gun control bill that was just passed. Do you think that this is going to do enough to curb gun violence, or is it more of a Band-Aid solution?
Well, I don't think it's going to do enough, but I think it's a positive step. I think that it at least breaks the seal on doing something, and I do think it will make a positive difference for people. But yeah, it's obviously, and look, I think many of the sponsors of that bill recognize that it doesn't do enough and that there's a long way left to go. I like to point out to people that one of the things that hasn't had anywhere near enough traction that we should be talking about a lot more is the fact that, about 20 years ago, roughly a little over 20 years ago, we passed a law that made gun companies immune from civil lawsuits. And when I talk about this, people think that what I'm saying is that we should make it so that gun companies should be able to be sued for making guns. It's not what I'm saying. I'm saying that if we simply repealed a really dumb law that we passed, we could make gun companies get treated the same way tobacco companies get treated in this country, which is we allow courts to set not even courts, juries to set a reasonable expectation of what gun companies are supposed to do in order to prevent guns from getting in the hands of people they shouldn't get in the hands of. Because there's a lot. I mean, everybody wonders, why do we not have smart guns yet? Why do guns get sold to people who clearly shouldn't have guns? Well, because we have given complete civil immunity to gun companies so that they have no responsibility in that area at all. And if you think about it, I mean, I don't think we're the same age, but when I was a kid, everybody was smoking. Like, you know, my parents smoked back then, and they've quit now, but they smoked back then. And like, we would go to a restaurant, it was like smoking or non-smoking. You go on a plane, smoking or non-smoking. Now, when I drive down the street, my son in the back seat, when he sees a person smoking in the car next to me, he's like, "Dad, that person is smoking a cigarette. That's disgusting." It's a big deal when he sees it. So, you know, that is not a result of legislation that was passed. That's a result of people sued and said, "Hey, I don't think that tobacco companies are living up to a reasonable expectation of how they should, you know, conduct themselves." And court stepped in and it forced tobacco companies to change in America. Well, we can do the same thing with guns. All we've got to do is treat gun companies the same way we treat the manufacturers of any other product.
Mm-hmm. And California right now has sort of gone down that path a little bit, sort of using the civil lawsuit reimbursement strategy. Would you like to see other governors try to work on this in their own states?
I'd love to see other states do it, but I also think we need to recognize that the states can only go so far, because at the end of the day, you've got a federal law. So the states are having to put things together around and through that federal ban on holding gun companies responsible for negligence.
And so on another topic, almost a year ago, the world was watching as the U.S. withdrew from Afghanistan. You know, people who had aided the U.S. struggled to get on those last flights out of Kabul. In the wake of that, you started the Afghan Rescue Project, which I'd like you to get to. But in that moment when you were watching that withdrawal, what emotions did that stir up in you?
Lots of emotions. I mean, look, it was. I intellectually understood that day was probably going to come for a while, and I had publicly said that we had been in Afghanistan longer than we should be, and that it was time to leave. But it still is an entirely different thing to see, you know, a place where there were a lot of people there still that I care about, and even people I don't know there who I care about, who did a lot for our country and who we made promises to, who were having a real hard time getting out. And to see everything, you know, so much of what we had fought to achieve there, not all, because we accomplished some things, but, you know, the girls that were able to go to school, you know, the pieces, I'm not going to say full democracy, but the pieces of democracy that were in place, to see them devolve and to see people as horrible as the Taliban take over was pretty awful. What that changed into for me when I got really involved with Afghan evacuation efforts was going from something that was triggering to something that was newly traumatic. I mean, the experience of, you know, trying to get people out of that country, which we've been very successful, but there's a lot of people left. It's been very difficult.
And what has been the most challenging and the most rewarding part of the Afghan Rescue Project? And have you been able to find success, you know, in the year since those last flights were leaving?
The most rewarding part has been that we've saved about 2,000 lives, which is, you know, probably the most important thing I've ever done. And it's kind of surreal to wrap your mind around. And you know, that includes some people that I know personally, and to be able to be a part of that, it is, I mean, it's impossible to explain, and it's very emotional, and I'm very grateful for it. The hardest part is that there's tens of thousands and more people there who deserve to be out, and who our country promised we'd have their back because they had ours, and that people like me promised them that, because that's what we believed was going to happen. And that's very difficult emotionally to deal with, because I love my country and I don't like feeling like it is not living up to its promises. And that's how I feel about this.
Mhm. Do you think that there's more the US could have done to get people out sooner, or, you know, even since that time to help people out? Because I think the issue has sort of faded from the public's attention.
I don't spend a lot of time thinking about what the US could have done, because to me at this point, that's politics, and that's fine. There's plenty of things where I think about the politics of it. This just isn't one of them. But there's more we can be doing every single day and should be doing every single day. And I guess I just leave it there. Yeah, it continues, but it should continue at a greater pace.
Have you been able to get people out of Afghanistan, say in the last 6 months?
Yeah, I mean, it's continuing, but it's nowhere near the pace that it should be.
We're turning to healthcare for veterans. The PACT Act, which provides healthcare to veterans exposed to toxins while in service, was held up actually just last night by Senator Pat Toomey, who was expressing concerns about spending. Do you know people who have been exposed to these burn pits, and what would this bill mean for veterans?
Yes, I do know people who've been exposed to these burn pits. What would it mean to those people? Like, it would mean that they could get care for this thing that their service resulted in. That, you know, I had. There's no excuse. Like, it's every politician in America puts pictures of veterans on their website and has a bullet point in their materials about how great they are for veterans. And you just can't say that that's the case when you vote against something like this. I mean, it's just like, it's not a question of whether or not these things resulted in these illnesses. I mean, it's just like, you know, the stuff that they'll spend money on and not think about, like, they'll give tax credits to people who are big donors. They'll do all those things, and they'll call that job creation. But then to vote against this, it's not fiscally responsible. It's just ridiculous. And what it all comes back to is a basic sickness on veterans issues in this country, where we are constantly worried that somebody is going to get a benefit that they don't, quote unquote, deserve. And most Americans have no idea how limited the federal benefits system is for veterans, how unnecessarily limited. I mean, people don't know, for instance, that if you are a member of the National Guard who was mobilized on January 6th and then spent 5 months guarding the Capitol, but never deployed to Iraq or Afghanistan, your government does not consider you a veteran, and you will never be able to go to the VA if you get out of the military without having deployed. And that was your service. Like, that's ridiculous. And if most Americans knew that, they would think that's ridiculous. They would think it's ridiculous that, that if you got 3 DUIs in between your 4 combat deployments, that you were dishonorably discharged for it, and that you'll never be able to go to the VA for your medical needs. Like, that's ridiculous. Like, when people commit, nobody thinks that someone who gets out of prison after 40 years because they were convicted of felony murder shouldn't be allowed to get Medicare. But we take people who serve their country and we say, oh, you made a mistake, you're not going to be able to get the care that other veterans get. Like, that doesn't make any sense. And we should widen the sight aperture of who, like, broadly, of who can get services that are provided to veterans, because most Americans think we have, but we haven't.
And then I do have a couple of sort of political questions for you.
Sure.
I know you sort of stepped out of the political arena a bit, but
I'm still in politics. I'm just not running for stuff.
Right. Fellow Missourian Josh Hawley was seen at the most recent January 6th hearing. They showed video of him fleeing the Capitol from rioters that he had earlier given a fist pump to. And he said that he did not regret anything that did that day, but he's also, possibly preparing for a potential 2024 run. How do you see his potential candidacy?
I have no idea how Josh Hawley's going to do when he runs for president. I know what kind of person he is, and I know what kind of man he is, and that's something he's got to deal with. But look, Josh Hawley is big, phony, baloney, just BSer. I mean, that's what he is. And I'm sure he is going to run for president. And he'll probably do okay for a while. But at the end of the day, I don't think he's going to be successful in selling people on the whatever routine he's got going. I mean, what happened with him, I don't have a problem with the guy running from a mob that wants to kill members of the Senate. I have a problem with him just like afterwards acting like it wasn't partially his doing. It's not just that he pumped his fist at the crowd, it's that everybody had agreed that they weren't going to create this opportunity for this insurrection to happen because they weren't going to object to the results. But it was Josh Hawley who said, no, no, no. I think the most important thing is that more people on the right know who I am. That's what the country needs. And so he is the one who stepped forward and said, I'm going to do this. People should not forget that like what we saw on January 6th might not have happened if not for that decision that he made. And then, the way that he's been completely negligent and ignored the plight of the Capitol Police, who in that video, he's running past them. They are creating a wall to protect him. I mean, I think we all know what kind of man would do that. And it's nobody I want to be around.
Mm-hmm. And then Missouri's other Senate seat also is opening up. So there's a very close primary for both parties next week. Do you have any thoughts on the candidates in this race on either side of the aisle?
Eric Greitens is a sociopath and shouldn't be anywhere near power. And most of the people running on the Republican side with him are not that much better, but I think most of them are not sociopaths. I mean, I won't be voting for any of them because they're wrong about everything. But I think that they have like a soul, so that's good at least. And then there's two good people running on the Democratic side. So, I'm not going to weigh into that race, but we'll see what happens.
Mm-hmm. And the state, is overwhelmingly Republican, but 10 years ago, you won a statewide election. What do you think has changed? And do you think that either of the Democratic candidates have a chance in the general election?
Oh, look, there's always a chance. There's obviously a greater chance of Eric Greitens as the nominee. That doesn't mean I'm rooting for that because I'm not interested in chancing that he be the Republican, because even if he's the nominee, he's still going to be the favorite to win, and I'm not interested in tempting that fate. What's changed about Missouri? A couple of things. One, demographically, it used to be the case that, and look, by the way, I think this changed before my race in 2016. People have a tendency to look back at that race and go, oh, well, Kander came within like a couple of points on the same day that Hillary lost by 19. So like Missouri's changed a lot since then. No, my team ran an incredible campaign, and Missouri Trump won Missouri that day by more than he won Mississippi. So we shouldn't think like, well, that's the baseline. No, that's not what's going on. The demographics have changed. The state's gotten older. The Latino population hasn't grown in Missouri like it's grown in the rest of the country. And you see that playing out. But instead of looking to a candidate as a savior every couple of years, what we've got to do is the work. We've got to put in the infrastructure in place to make the progressive argument all year round, not just during election cycles. And there's models for that. I mean, Colorado used to be a red-ish state. It's now a purple to somewhat blue state. North Carolina is now a purple state. That wasn't the case several years ago. Georgia is now a purple state. That definitely wasn't the case a few years ago. And that's because people put in the work and they didn't do it, election cycle to election cycle. They took a long-term approach.
And you said that, you don't want to tempt fate and see Eric Greitens be the nominee, but one strategy that the National Democrats have been pursuing is to sort of spend money on advertising to prop up farther right candidates in an attempt to make the general election a bit easier for them. How do you feel about this sort of strategy?
Look, that's what Clay McCaskill did in 2012, and it worked with Todd Akin, and I think that was the right decision. But that's because we weren't at the time living through a moment when to be extreme meant to not believe in democracy. Like, we don't know that Todd Akin would have, like Todd Akin wasn't going to be confronted if he had become the U.S. Senator with the possibility of being like, no, I know that person got more votes and won the Electoral College, but we're just not going to let them be president. Like, the stakes are too high. So I think it's deeply irresponsible, and I don't think we should be doing it.
I don't want to take up too much of your time, but I have one last question. So you said in your book that you still think you would be one hell of a president, And of Democratic voters, only around 25% want to see President Biden run again in 2024. I know you said you're not.
Just to be clear, I didn't say that second part. That's
Yeah, that's correct. The second part is my addition there. But clearly the party is looking for new leaders. I know you said that you are not running for anything right now and are not necessarily interested in it. But do you think you might be ready to step back into that ring come 2 years from now?
No. But that's not because I'm not ready. Like, I could run for president right now. I think I'd do a pretty good job. I could, if I got elected, be president right now. I want to be clear about that. And the reason and people hear me say that and they say, oh, well, Kander is making sure that he preserves the opportunity. No. I know that when people look at me, what they are seeing is PTSD a lot of the time. And I want to make sure that people understand that the reason I say, look, I could still run for president and be president if I wanted to, is because I want to make sure that when people are hiring a combat veteran or somebody else who has sustained trauma, who has PTSD, that they don't get the message of that person can't do the job. That person can do the job. I can do that job if that's what I choose to do. It's just not the part of my life that I'm in. I spent a lot of time, a lot of years thinking obsessively about the future because I was not having a good time in the present. I had intrusive memories and disruptive thoughts, and I was having nightmares every night and, felt like I was in danger all the time. And I wanted to avoid that. I wanted to avoid what was going on in my mind. And so I would plan out the future and I'd think about the future. That's not what's going on with me anymore. To be in a phase of post-traumatic growth means I'm really enjoying my life. And the other thing that's changed for me is I used to feel, and this is common to people who have experienced trauma, a need to redeem myself. I didn't feel good about who I was as a person. And that meant that I felt like I had to go and do things in order to prove to myself that I wasn't irredeemable. I felt like I hadn't done enough. I don't feel that way anymore. I feel like I've done enough. I feel like America and I are square. I still do things for my country, but I don't do them because I think I have to. I do them when I want to, when it's something I care about. But the difference is I actually think that I have now earned the right to enjoy my life and to be with my family and to do the things I want to do. And I'm very blessed in that I still have quite a platform. When I have something I want to say, I can go on TV and I can say it, and then I can go coach Little League. And if I were to run for president or to accept a cabinet position or whatever, I couldn't do both those things. But I want to do both those things. And at some point, I may have the desire enough to do that I'm willing to put part of that aside and do it. I would imagine if I do, it'll be when my kids are older. And it'd be a journey or an adventure that my wife and I would take on together. But that's definitely not going to happen in the next couple of years.
Gotcha. And so you said you're only doing things that you care about or you want to do. I guess in the immediate future, in the next month, is there something that you're looking forward to?
I'm continuing to do the work that I do for Veterans Community Project. I'm the president of National Expansion at Veterans Community Project. We are building our campuses, which deal with curbing veteran suicide and ending veterans homelessness. We're building them we built one in Kansas City. We're building them in the Denver area, in Sioux Falls, South Dakota, and the St. Louis, in the city of St. Louis. And then we've just purchased property in Oklahoma City. We're going to build there. And then in the next month, I think we're probably going to have an announcement about another major American city that we're going into. So that stuff is really exciting for me. And I enjoy that a lot.
Yeah, that's awesome. Is there anything else that, you'd like to share while we're here?
The book is Invisible Storm, A Soldier's Memoir of Politics and PTSD. It's a New York Times bestseller. It is very good, I think. And it is also funny. People wouldn't necessarily think that because it's about PTSD in part, but it's got a lot of jokes that people will enjoy. And all of my royalties from the book go to Veterans Community Project, which people can find at vcp.org if they want to support the organization.
Great. Well, thank you again so much for joining us. We really appreciate it.
You bet. Thank you.